In the year following the retreat of Lars Porsena, which is about 246 AUC or 507 BC, Spurius Larcius and Titus Herminius were elected as consuls. Under their council was the last of the messengers arriving under the behalf of the deposed King Tarquinius Superbus received. Third time's the charm, right? The Romans didn't outright protest the notion, but offered to send along the most senior of the Senate in return with the ambassador to explain their convictions. So impossible it was to cogently explain why they adamantly refused the service of a king that a simple no wouldn't suffice. That, with their tireless repeating of their lines, Tarquinius Superbus would be made aware of just how fragile his skin would be if he entered Roman territory, and that the Etruscans may never again try to push the KQ, or king question. As Livy wrote, quote, "The Roman people were not living under a monarchy, but were free. They had resolved to throw open their gates to enemies sooner than to kings. In this prayer they were all united, that the day which saw the end of liberty in their city might also see the city's end." Ironic. Upon arriving at the court of King Lars Porsena, the group of the most respected and vintage wine-age senators gripped their togas at the neck with their free hands, preparing to loft it over their faces and die a dignified death. But the reigning and deposed kings lounged in their respective and respectively sized thrones. With a nod from his compatriots, the eldest and most eloquent of the gaggle spreads his arms and expresses, "I am sure, in your day, you desired what you thought was best for Rome. I am also sure that you see what Rome is now as straying from that vision. But if you really wish for what is best for Rome and her people, you will remain here until Thanatos pays you a visit." Lars confers with Superbus before ushering him away. He sighs before declaring, "Since this is your fixed resolve, I will neither importune you with repeated insistence upon a hopeless plea, nor will I deceive the Tarquinii of hope of aid of which it is not in my power to grant. Let them seek elsewhere, whether war or peace be their object, for a place of exile, that nothing may hinder my being at peace with you." As a symbol of goodwill, Lars returned the hostages whom Rome had to hand over in order for the Etruscans to vacate the Ianiculum with the senators. In addition, the territory of Veii was returned to Rome. Mission success for the consulship of Larcius and Herminius, defeating the Etruscan army at several key junctions, then negotiating back what was lost in the hasty peace deal. The election of 247 AUC, or 506 BCE, put Marcus Valerius and Publius Postumius into power. They spent their time going to war with who else but the Sabines. They gave the Sabines a thumping so bad that the Sabines immediately joined arms again and threatened Rome. In the cold of the 248 January, Publius Valerius again took the reins of power for his fourth consulship, and Titus Lucretius for his second. With such hardened commanders at the helm, the Sabine ranks splintered into those who wished for peace and those who wished for war. One among the peace camp was Attius Clausus, or in Latin Appius Claudius, whose ancestors would go on to sit atop the imperial throne for a time. The party for war disliked Appius' pacificity, so they dropped great violence upon him and his household, causing himself and his clients, which are to their patrons as managers are to entry levels, to flee to Rome and seek their clemency. Rome was merciful on this day. It made him and his host citizens, giving them land near the Anio. Now in the offensive, Publius Valerius and Titus Lucretius marched their armies into the territories of the Sabines. Starting first with destroying their will to fight, the pair destroyed the farms and fields. Seeing their food stocks rendered to mute ash, the Sabines formed arms and faced the Romans. But the wind flew from behind the Romans' backs as the vulture swooped down and perched atop the legionary eagle. Mars was with the Romans. The Sabines thus beaten, the pair went about causing as much mayhem as possible to ensure that they would not be a threat for many, many years. Not long after Agrippa Menenius and Publius Postumius, what a year to have such hard names for consulships, the consulship of Menenius and Postumius. Remember him though, Postumius? Yeah, he was in this video. Were elected as consuls. Publius Valerius passed away, unfortunately. His body was interred in his family grave, long obtestated by his adoring family members. It is said that he was so poor upon dying that the Roman state ended up funding his funeral. Agrippa Menenius and Publius Postumius were barely seated in their consular chairs before two towns, by name Pometia and Cora, rebelled against the Roman yoke and seek to return to the Aurunci. The consuls sallied forth to the lands that were nominally their own, crushing the Pometians so thoroughly that even the hostages they handed over to the Romans to join their ranks were themselves slaughtered like their neighbors, but with the caveat that the hostages were executed as a part of a triumph that Agrippa and Publius shared. The war was far from over, though, for the next year's consuls, for the year of 249, Obiter Verginius and Spurius Cassius followed in the footsteps of their predecessors, hoping to achieve greater victory than they had. All in vain, however, for at the siege of Bometia, the Sabines rushed out of the doors with torches and anything they could light on fire, filling their hands where normally would be swords. Swinging their fires around and torching all of the siege works, what Romans survived the onslaught routed at once all around the consuls. And one of the consuls, which not even Livy knows which one, was burned, bruised, slashed, thrown from his horse, and he would have nearly been killed too had it not been for the lictors. But with a few months to recruit more men, and time for the wounded consul to heal, they returned. Rebuilding their siege works, they had no sooner formed them up to the height of the ramparts than the Sabines surrendered the city. All of prominence were put to the sword, the rest were put to chains and sold as booty. Not screwing around this time, Pometia was wiped from the earth and the maps. Returning to Rome, the consul enjoyed his own triumph, though Livy notes that this is more because he fixed his own whoopsie than because of his own military prowess or the glories of his victories. In 253, Postimius Cominius and Titus Largius, and you know it doesn't mean it, but I'm just going to call him the Big Cheese anyways, they were elected consuls. It was during their consulship that a very inauspicious happening befell a drunken celebration of one of Rome's many games. An unnamed Sabine youth, or several, decided, being absolutely shit-faced, to reenact the rape of the Sabine women. A couple things wrong with this picture. One, he's a Sabine, and presumably is going to be doing it upon a Roman woman, which could absolutely end in a brawl. Two, the women he chose were, as Livy puts it, scorta, whence we derive escorts. Now this is all well and good in the view of patriotism, since this dude is putting on a show of reenacting Romulus' defining incident amongst his followers. But at the same time, he's a Sabine that went and grabbed prostitutes in a blatant mockery of Romulus. And it could be interpreted as him calling the noblewoman Romulus, borrowed without intent to return, prostitutes themselves. The reaction was, well, about what you'd expect. Livy described it as, quote, a brawl which was almost a battle, and, trifling as its origin was, it seemed to threaten a fresh outbreak of the war. Worse still, and a bit of dramatic irony, the man with whom Tarquinius Superbus was hiding in exile, Octavius Mamilius, and yes, the very same Octavius who is indeed my channel profile picture, had united some 30 Latin cities against Rome. Kinda spooky. So spooky, in fact, that the Romans considered electing a dictator for the first time in their history. This is a no light thing, mind. Remember earlier when I quoted Livy saying that the Romans would rather their city fall than the unchecked rule lord over them? Well, here's the point that takes the consul with whom walks astride another, that even if one consul were to do some crazy shit, he could still veto all of Crazy Boy's actions, to sole ruler of Rome and her allies. Decisions like this don't just come easy. I mean, who are the real options here? Cominius the con man? Or Largius the large? Give me a break. And if you bet on the Big Cheese, you were right. Titus Largius named Spurius Cassius as his master of horse, or second in command. Fun little side note, Marcus Antonius was Caesar's master of horse during his dictatorship. And carrying on, even though it was Largius's only consulship, being elected gave him the power and the right to hold a dictatorial fasces. So when the lictors exited the Curia, axe heads glistening in the sunlight, the plebs were overcome by such a madness, a malady of the mind, that they began to demand orders from Largius. Now shit has gone from looking a little worse for wear to absolutely obliterated by the fan. The Sabines were even worried, sending entreatments for peace to the Senate and dictator Big Cheese. They begged him to spare the juveniles that had sparked the whole incident. The Romans replied, according to Livy, to pardon the young men was possible, but not old men who contrived one war after another. Zap! Regardless, the Romans still entertained the notions of peace. The Sabines seem to have just wanted a white peace, though, since when the Romans asked to be repaid for their expenses in building forces over Sabine posturing, the Sabines got cold feet. War has begun. And did I just say war happened? Well, it was declared. But all that really happened was Largius burned up the rest of his 6-month dictatorship, and then new consuls were elected, who also didn't do much with their consulships. Just like those damn Sabines, always being sly foxes. And now this is where the fun starts. Now this is pod racing. January of 255 saw Titus Aebutius and Gaius Vetusius elected. During their year, they fought off the Latins by besieging Fidenae and capturing Crumesteria and Praeneste. Don't know what they expected to happen here, but the Latin coalition that Octavius Mamilius had been building finally kicked into gear. And this is where the fun begins.